Haiti is near the United States with fertile land and cheap labor that American business tycoons find attractive. U.S. Navy warships visited Haitian ports 17 times between 1857 and 1914 to protect American lives and property, but did not stay long as there were few Americans in the country and little American property to protect. With European powers busy with World War I, the American Empire dispatched U.S. Marines to invade Haiti and seize control. Several hundred Germans had immigrated to Haiti in the early 1800s. Their children born in Haiti were citizens who could own land and ran most businesses. American tycoons were angry that a long-standing Haitian law prohibited foreign ownership of land, but the German Haitians could. The U.S. government demanded a change, but were ignored by the democratic Haitian government. In November 1914, the U.S. Navy Department drew up a proposal called Plan for Landing and Occupying the City of Port-au-Prince that outlined measures to take control of the capital of Haiti, and also set forth an official public rationale to invade, quote, solely for the establishment of law and order. That rationale sufficed for immediate intervention, which American President Woodrow Wilson soon ordered without consulting Congress. The first step was to defund the Haitian banking system. The American National City Bank had invested in the country's leading commercial bank that also served as the government treasury. In December 1914, President Wilson sent the USS Machias and a detachment of U.S. Marines to secure this investment. They marched ashore and removed all 24,000 ounces of gold worth $500,000 belonging to the Haitian government from the vault of Haiti's National Bank. It was taken to the National City Bank of New York, now called Citibank. Historian Laurent Debeau wrote that this, quote, can only be described as international armed robbery. The U.S. military invasion of Haiti began on July 28, 1915, when 330 U.S. Marines and Navy sailors landed from the USS Washington in Port-au-Prince to restore order after riots. Since that ship was loitering offshore, the violence was probably instigated by American agents. Marines met little resistance since they promised to restore order and provide aid. But the American military took over the collection of customs on imports and exports that was the main source of income for the government. They also confiscated all German Haitian properties and shut down their businesses. The Americans demanded that the Haitian National Assembly pass a law to allow Americans to own land. The legislature refused, so the Americans nominated a new president. Marine Captain Smedley Butler later wrote, quote, when the National Assembly met, the Marines stood in the aisles with their bayonets until the man selected by the American minister was made president. Sudre Darte Guanabe was appointed president, pictured with his American military minders. He issued a decree that dissolved the National Assembly and signed a treaty to allow Americans to own land, collect customs on imports and exports, and run the Haitian government. The Haitian legislature did not meet again until 1929. Although Haitians offered no resistance to the initial landing of American troops, resentment grew. The Americans had won some respect by offering the services of Navy doctors and helping relieve the food shortages in the cities, but acceptance wore thin as American troops proceeded to occupy every major town, take over customs houses, local governments, and the Haitian national government. They centralized control and deprived local communities of authority and funds. The number of U.S. Marines grew to 2,000 to occupy all of Haiti. To help enforce American rule, the Marines created a 2,400-man national police force of Haitians led by 100 white American officers. A primary American mission was road building. The deplorable conditions of roads in the rural areas presented a problem for American development and control. To obtain work crews, the Marines conscripted local men. They were supposed to be fed, paid, and only made to work near their homes, but Marine officers frequently ignored these conditions and rounded up men to work as slave labor. Admiral William Caperton, pictured, was the commander of the American military force. He later wrote an essay about the goal of this conquest. Quote, "Thousands of Haitian peasants would be happy to work in sugarcane and cotton fields for 20 cents a day. The time will surely come when once more the famed production of the ancient French colonial Saint Domingue will return." The admiral continued, quote, "The great Artibonite plain in the north, which 150 years ago was crowded with the most productive plantations in the world, is now practically devoid of production except for immediate home consumption. One cannot believe that with the proved fertility of this soil, its great possibilities, and the presence of a dense population of laborers, which will be glad to work at unheard of low wages, it is certain sometime in the future to make this great Artibonite plain one of the most flourishing gardens of the world." Admiral Caperton failed to realize that Haitian peasants were not enthusiastic about returning Haiti to the high levels of agricultural productivity that slave labor once provided. Many peasants fled to avoid conscripted road work and joined rural gangs known as cacos. These rogue groups followed local strongmen and had been instrumental in forcing changes in government leadership over the past 50 years, often through revolutions. Cacos began to attack American Marines. Admiral Caperton ordered the Marines to begin, quote, "search and kill" missions. He declared martial law and vowed to destroy the Cacos by allowing arrest of suspects for trial by U.S. military courts. The same edict censored Haitian newspapers and imposed curfew. The largest battle took place at Fort Riviere, an old masonry fort held by over 200 Cacos armed with rifles, machetes, swords, and knives. Marine Major Smedley Butler led 72 Marines in a surprise attack in November 1915 that killed 51 rebels, with only one Marine wounded. In another instance, Butler recalled being trapped in a nighttime ambush. The following day, according to Butler, quote, "The Marines went wild after their devilish night and hunted the Cacos like pigs, killing 75 of them." Marines terrorized Haitian rural communities at the slightest provocation. Captain Chandler Campbell recorded in his company log in the fall of 1915, quote, "Through their women, I have tried to communicate to the Cacos that, in fact, if in the future a single shot is fired by them, or if they create any disturbance, we would return and burn all their houses and completely destroy their crops." End quote. Within a few months, Marine patrols had burned down most villages in the areas Cacos operated and killed scores of Cacos. Historian Arthur Link wrote, quote, "The process of pacification soon became almost a war of extermination as fighting increased over the next 5 years." Caco leader Charlemagne Perralte was a former Haitian military officer who claimed to have 40,000 followers and vowed to drive the Americans into the sea. His peasant army's weapons were primitive: machetes, knives, a few pistols, and a few hundred rifles, and were no match for the thousands of well-trained Marines backed by 2,700 Haitian constables. They fought Cacos in 131 engagements from April to October 1919, with Marine Corps casualty records listing a total of 3,071 Haitians killed. The pace dropped significantly after Perralte was assassinated in November 1919 by a disguised U.S. Marine, Sergeant Herman Haneke, who infiltrated his camp. The Marines captured Perralte's corpse, tied it to a door, then photographed it and distributed posters of the disturbing image. Sergeant Haneke, pictured, was awarded the Medal of Honor and promoted to second lieutenant. U.S. Marines did not leave Haiti until 1934 as a result of President Roosevelt's anti-colonial effort. The United States government maintained direct control of Haiti's finances until 1947, as the American-trained police force remained the principal power broker in Haitian politics and protected American business interests. The American colonization of Haiti succeeded, but at the cost of thousands of Haitian lives, while military records list 146 U.S. Marines killed during their 19-year occupation. Smedley Butler was eventually promoted to Major General and wrote about his role in the empire in his famous book, War is a Racket. In a 1933 speech, Butler said that he worked as a muscle man for big business and made Haiti, quote, a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues.